the number of attendees is starting to level off, so we can probably go ahead and get started. I will hand it over to Blake Cush from OVS to kick us off.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Taylin. Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the OVS VAP Training Center webinar, Healing Center Documentation. I'm Blake Cush. I'm the Training and Outreach Unit Chief for OVS. Our Director, Elizabeth Cronin, is also with us today, and she will offer some opening remarks shortly after I cover just a little bit of webinar housekeeping for us. So today's webinar is one of a few in a series of webinars we've offered through the OVS Training and Technical Assistance Request Program, or TARP, which you're going to learn a little more about in just a minute from our TARP providers at the CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance. They're awesome, and I'm excited for you to learn and a little more about what they do for us. For the last few years, we've hosted a series of these webinars designed to help you tackle some of the unique challenges and sort of pressing issues you and your programs you work for might be facing at this time. And today is no different. So we're hoping that you get the most of this training from Kenton Kirby, who is amazing. Can't wait for you guys to hear from him. And you should you want to go back and revisit what was covered, today's webinar is also being recorded. And we usually publish the webinar about a day or two after on our YouTube channel, as well as links to the slides and all that. You should have received the slides as well prior to joining us, but if not, we'll put a link to them in the chat momentarily as well. You can access all of that information and other resources about this program and these trainings on our webpage, ovs.ny.gov/training. And finally, as you exit today's webinar, you will be directed to an evaluation survey on the presentation. Their QR codes will also be available to direct you there. Take a couple minutes and please give us your feedback. That feedback is incredibly valuable, and it does genuinely get used to improve our offerings for trainings that we do from training to training. So from the last one, we used incorporated information to sort of improve what we can do for the next one that we offer. So it really is valuable, and we appreciate your time on that. That said, I'd like to officially welcome the Office of Victim Services Director, Elizabeth Cronin.
Thanks so much, Blake. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You know, I'm watching everyone as they're putting in their introductions in the chat, and it's people really from all over the state, which is exactly what we were hoping for, you know, from Western New York to Northern New York, all the way out to Long Island. You know, people who are doing this work, who are finding commonality all across the state. So welcome to everyone. And, you know, since we started doing the TTARP program, it's really important to us that you kind of direct what you need from this program. And so these webinars are based on information that we glean from all of you about what you need and what you're looking for in these trainings. So thank you for all the feedback that we get. And as Blake said, through these evaluations, it's really helpful for us to know, you know, what you're looking for. So I want to briefly just thank, as usual, Blake and Rachel for the amazing job that you and your team do in setting up these programs and for overseeing this TTARP program. It's been so successful due to the good work that you do. And I want to also thank the CUNY Institute for working with us on this TTARP. I think this is the 4th webinar that is being done with this collaboration. And I think we've done 25 custom projects since September of 2022. So that's a lot of really good programming that is designed for all of you, specifically, you know, for how you need to get this information and how you want to utilize this resource. So thanks for coming. I'm going to turn the program over to Taylin to introduce our amazing speaker, Mr. Kirby.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Blake. So real quick, I'll just kind of give a super quick overview of TARP so you all are aware of what these awesome services are and how you can request them. But so we work with organizations, victim assistance programs all across the state, providing tailored and customized training. So really anything that you need, we'll work with you to develop training and technical assistance that meets those needs. We bring in professionals from across the field, consultants, et cetera, and all of this is at no cost to you. So it's just a handful of examples of things we offer, everything from strategic planning to conflict resolution and communication, how to create a more accessible organization, et cetera. and everything in between. So it's really whatever you need. We are happy to work with you and make that happen. So to receive TARP services and how you actually request them, you'll pick something from our training catalog, and you do have an option to select something that is not listed here. If there's ever something that is not in the catalog that you really need support with, we're happy to make that happen. And then you will submit the request form. All of these links will be included in the follow-up email afterwards, so you're able to easily access them. And program directors or executive directors are the ones who need to submit this form. So if you are not a program director or executive director, just talk to them and say, hey, I'm happy to kind of help write this and submit it, and you just sign off on it. And then we'll work with you all to make it happen. And so with that, I'm very happy to introduce Kenton Kirby. He is from CVK Consulting, does a lot of really incredible work in the field of trauma and anti-violence work, et cetera. And so I will go ahead and hand it over to him.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Kenton Kirby, and I'm going to be with you all for the next, I guess, till 2:30, and we're going to get to build with one another. Great part. You actually all started doing part of my job, because I want to find out who was in the room, and well, the Zoom room, and you're all actually doing it already. So by saying where you're from, what orgs you're out of, and you're all doing some really amazing work, and I love to hear more. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of familiar names and orgs that I've worked with over the years. So hey, friends. But to start, just a little bit about me, right? I'm beyond the work that I do, and I think the work that we do here, working with survivors across the spectrum, we have to understand that our work is we bring a lot of ourselves into our work, whether we want to, we want to acknowledge that. So for me, the work what I bring into this work is I'm a husband, newlywed husband. I'm a brother. I am the son of the late Carter and Vernice Kirby. I'm a caretaker. I have an adult cousin that I'm responsible for, who has special needs. But I'm also most proudly a native New Yorker, right? Love my city, love my state, specifically Brooklyn. Former athlete, there's an old picture of me from a very long time ago, when I thought I had hoop dreams, but this is part of my identity. But I'm also a survivor. Have a number of different things I've gotten through, and through accessing resources and looking at what was available to me, I was able to kind of get through those things. And professionally, I'm a social worker, right? All of those identities and who I am is what brought me here. But then the other complexity is I've also caused harm, right? And that harm that I've caused has ranged, right? It could be anything, physical harm or emotional harm, right? But I've also been harmed. So I say all that to say this: we are more than our titles. And I would love, over the course, the next, I don't know, couple seconds, 20 seconds, if folks could add in, what else about you? What else about, what other than your job? Who are you? Right? So I would welcome folks to add that into the chat. And I would love to see, because, that is another really important part of this work, understanding who we are. Survivor, thank you. The one thing I would say, we bring so much of ourselves into this work, right? We are folks that at some point were told that we are great at talking to people, or we're a lover. I love that one, right? You got sisters, got photographers, got mothers here, right? Dancers. This is great. I'm loving the fact that we're also acknowledging our other identities here. And I say all this because it's so important in our work. You have to bring ourselves into this work, right? While also keeping a certain level of parameters and distance, just enough so we can tap into everyone's humanity. So throughout this time together, please, anything comes up, top of mind, please add into the chat perspectives, questions. If I can't pick it up, someone else on the panel will actually be able to lift it up into the conversation, and I'll try to answer as best I can anything that may come up. But today we're going to be talking about I call it healing center documentation, right? How do we capture what we're doing with the work that we're doing with our folks. But before we start even doing that, we're going to talk I'm going to offer a framing of helping versus serving, right? Going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed care. What is that exactly? We hear that word all the time, but I bet you if we ask multiple folks, they're going to have different definitions. Also thinking about what sort of implicit biases we may bring into our own actual documentation. And then understanding the double-edged sword of when we document, right? Like the usefulness of it, how impactful it is, but also the other side of what kind of harm or stigma it can also cause. And just also being understand it's documentation, how it's important. And it's important to really kind of, how do you center humanity and the person's experience within how we're telling their story? Because once again, we are telling their story in the scope of the work we're doing, especially working with survivors. And I'll also talk about how power dynamics play into all of this. Whether we want to do it, admit or not, power dynamics play in. Folks are coming into our doors because something went left, something went wrong. And our job is to understand that power differential and work with it to kind of try to balance it out as best as we can. So before I start talking about nuances of like specific documentation and how we do it, when you think about our work, and many of you have been doing this for some time, I know some of the folks in the chat, how many of you, if you say, you have to ask, are you doing this work as helping or are you serving? And if you could add it to the chat, because I can't hear what folks say. Let me know if you feel like you're helping or you're in service here. Serving, some said both. Serving, okay. Both, helping, serving, both. All right. Look at this. This is good. So we got both. All right. This is helpful. So I want to put words to this now. This whole notion of helping versus serving. I think this is a great grounding for us as we move on, as we move into thinking about how we document. So when I think of helping, and this is just a framing, when we help, we're creating a distance between people. Us versus that person, right? Many of us, the language we use, many of us come into this work because we want to help people. That means essentially, perhaps we may be coming in with an idea, a framing that we see life as weak or broken, right? The person's coming to us broken, and it's our job to put them together, right? When we think that way, while it's great, it's also not a relationship between equals. And this work that we're doing is a relationship between equals. What we bring and what the person that comes to our doors brings, the survivors, the participants, clients, whatever we refer to our folks that we work with. And the other thing, when we help, we become aware of our own strength, right? Meaning, I always say, we get a sense of satisfaction, like, look what I did. Look how helpful I was to this person, right? Or when I'm off the clock, I get to talk about the wonderful work I've done with these folks that are coming to me. So, it's another example. Our help is sometimes led by our needs as service providers. So like, here's an example. If I've heard this a lot, I can lead the person to water, but I can't make them drink, right? That framing, think about how that may kind of create this power differential. I can lead you to water, but I can't make them drink. So it sounds like we're giving you autonomy, but we're not in that sense, in that framing. So that's how I would look at help. What I offer here isn't serving. When we serve, we see the person as a whole. That distance that we have with this framing of help, we break that down a bit. And the challenge with this is so much of our work has been centered around creating a boundary around separation is our foundation of our work. So thinking about this work as the folks that get to work with us, get to come through our doors, we get to work with them. They're bringing something to the work, just like we are. and there shouldn't be any real hierarchy. But it's a challenge because we are working in settings where there is that perceived hierarchy. So the challenge is when you're doing your work, when you're documenting, and when you're building that relationship with our clients, it's about how do we lift their voice up? How do we lift their voice up in the sense of the services that we're offering? They're offerings, right? Folks have, whether it's mandated or non-mandated services, people still have choice, right? Every choice has a consequence. So if we look at this, we're serving, there could be a mutual sense of gratitude, right? And also one other thing about serving, I think, taps into kind of our foundation of why many of us get into the work. It's important, it gives us a space to know that our humanity is more powerful than our expertise. So before many of us came in here, went through whatever trainings or education, there was a foundational thing of, I have a story, I am someone that is invested in this. So that is service is a way of tapping back into that part of why we do the work we do here, and takes us off of that silo of what do they call it? The ivory tower of our expertise, right? So I'm gonna see what's in the chat. Let me just check what's in the chat. All right, anyway, let me see. All right. There's a lot to keep up in the chat, so I just wanna make sure. So anyway, so it seems like you all are getting this notion of helping versus serving. Just offer it up. If you all think about that as we move on in this training, and also in your just day-to-day of your work, right? And I'll even say this, if there was no need, right? Let's say if I work in violence prevention, if there was no violence, I wouldn't have a job. So there's a mutuality there. And so, for example, right? So I think it's important for us to understand that it's important for us to lead with that there's mutuality, but then also the folks that come through our doors, it's not for us to change them, to help them in a way that we see them need to be fixed, right? And I love this visual I'm about to show y'all. So for me, it illustrates helping versus serving, right? So you have on my left, you have the one block of cheese. I think it's like, let's call it cheddar, not cheddar. Is it cheddar that doesn't have the holes? And then other cheese on the right side is the Swiss cheese. So the cheese on the left is saying, hey, I can fix you. I can fill up those holes. But the Swiss cheese is like, no, but this is who I am. So how do we do that? How does that play out in some of our work, right? And sometimes it's maybe even our discomfort in accepting some of our folks' realities. And we want to, sometimes that notion of we want to fix it. We want to fix it. And why are you fixing it? What is the motivation behind that desire to fix it? So just want to hold that up here, right? Like had a young person years ago I used to work with, and I was the cheddar and he was the Swiss cheese. And I had high hopes for him. I had all these ideas for him. He was a survivor. He had been through a number of experiences. And I said, all right, these are the things we're gonna get in place for you. We're gonna get you to get your GED, your high school equivalency. We're gonna get you ready to get a trade, and you're gonna do this. And all he wanted to do was, at the end of the day, to make himself happy, he wanted to be able to have a job that just got him to pay his bills and would get paid for whatever he wanted. And he really enjoyed working as a janitor at a bar. And I was trying to push my own desires on him, because I was like, no, you can have more. But I was like, but that's what he wanted. And I had to check myself, and I was like, I'm being the cheddar here. And I had to accept his differences. And sometimes that plays out in even how we're documenting and telling the story of the folks that we're working for. So I'm gonna take a second, check the chat, anything. All right. So Allison mentions, I started helping as victim advocate because I wanted to share resources with them. Then having a job put it on a large scale to help my community. Okay, thank you for that, Allison. All right, let me continue. Yeah, so y'all can steal this visual if you want. I think I have it in the slides that you're gonna get, so you can keep that visual. It's a good one. So if someone's brave enough, could they put what is this between helping and serving in the chat? I'd love to see if someone wants to be brave enough to try it. And I'll give you time to do it. And in the interim, oh, someone put it up. Let's see what we got here. Helping is aimed at fixing while serving is more strengths-based. Yep. The client self, well, thank y'all. Helping is assistance. Yeah. And I wonder, it's assistance to who? Is it assistance for us to feel like we're doing a good job? Serving is from your heart. Helping. All right. We should hopefully we're capturing all of this feedback in the chat. I think we're recording this. So this is some good stuff. And hopefully that's another training that y'all can put together just from comments in the chat. So this is great. So far, so good. Let's keep this thing going. So real quick, why do we take notes? Over the years, I've worked in city agencies, I've worked in small nonprofits, I've worked in large nonprofits. I've been told so many reasons why we take notes, right? In short, we need to keep a record of relevant client participant information, right? And we also track our progress of our work, right? So one of the things where we say, if we don't write down important and relevant information, we run the risk of not meeting the needs of our program participants. We need to have relevant do our work as effective advocates. So it's one of those things where I'll say this, like I would need to know if a client has a specific issue, like let's say living with substance use, right? And if they're interested, they want to get help for that, assistance for that, then knowing that, I can then refer them to said service. The challenge is sometimes we assume what the need is, right? Based on certain buzzwords we hear when someone says, oh, whatever the buzzword is, then we tend to go with our script. Another part of this, we keep case information in order from one participant to the next. You all work in various settings. You have tons of clients and folks coming through your doors. It is very easy to lose track of information from one participant or client to the next. So in short, basically keeping notes is for us, another way for us to stay organized and keep these stories and these folks' lives like aware, like, and make sure like we're talking about John Doe, right? John Doe here, Jane Doe here. So, and another part of it is the information. We got to think about what is it that we actually need versus what we don't need, right? So I'm gonna ask a question. Let's say in your respective spaces, whatever site you work out of, when we meet with a new client, what information do you gather from them? What information do you feel is relevant that you gather? And what information do you typically gather that you're like, maybe I don't really need that? And why is it not relevant? Once again, let's see what's in the chat. Demographics, safety. Okay, thank you, April. Thank you, Allison. Presenting issue, okay. The biopsychosocial. Laura, I am ready to talk a little bit about the biopsychosocial. The current crisis, what they're looking for help with. The emotional well-being. So some folks are talking about, let's get the whole picture. Some folks are saying, let's figure out let's focus on the presenting need. Some folks who are not getting enough information about the person's strengths. Kate, I'd love to hear what's the important initially when you first meet with a client, why it's important to really dive in on that complex trauma part. I would love to, wonder why at that first pace, at that first thing. Someone said, let them tell their story. So another folks like, let them, let's go on a ride with them. Justin, you mentioned as much as possible, we often don't know what was relevant. Yeah. So then maybe there's something about letting them going for the ride with them, letting them tell their story. Hmm. You know, it's interesting. I've actually had in my own like therapy over the years, every session or every time I had a session, it was they would say, my therapist would say, what would you like to get out of this time together? And I wonder if that would be a useful tool for some of you all in your work. What would you want with our time? What would you want to get out of our time together? Because you think there could be a way to kind of weave in what you need, right? Into that. So I said, what is it you need today? Thank you, Paula. You know, let's talk and glean information stories and ask what is it that they need. Okay. Know what they need. Yeah. Christine, sometimes they don't know what they want and need. And maybe sometimes even that important to ask in that moment. And maybe offer some suggestions. Right. So and that's the other part of this. We work with folks who come in with a lot of story, a lot of history of harm they've received, but also they've received a lot of harm at the hands of us, not Kenton Kirby, the individual, but Kenton Kirby, the practitioner who's been in the field for about 20 years, right? So that's what they're bringing into those spaces. So sometimes maybe it's about doing it a little different. What do you need? What do you want to get out of our time together here? And then weaving it in, perhaps. So let's see what came in the chat. Karen mentioned, I had a client that was forced to come speak with you about the sexual violence that she experienced. She did not want to share, that she not have to share. She appreciated that. See, and honestly, it's people are complex and we're like onions, right? We all know that. We are like onions. So sometimes it's about building that trust to get there, right? So thank you all for that. You all have a lot of interesting perspectives to offer here. So I want to talk about the other thing, trauma-informed approach, right? We talk about this all the time. We all want to be rooted in, we want to be informed by trauma. We want to be trauma-informed practice, trauma-informed approaches. But I think I said it earlier, but I feel like if I ask 10 people, line 10 practitioners up across the state of New York, and I said, can you give me 2 lines to describe what does it mean to be trauma-informed? I'd probably get 9 different answers. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. They're all different framings. We all bring our own perspectives into this. So I always say, very simple, trauma-informed approach to the work is it shifts the approach from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, right? And it's also a recognition that we have a clear picture of their needs and relevant history. I keep saying relevant history to inform how we work collaboratively with them. Once again, this work is collaborative. And I put at the bottom here this universal assumption of trauma. Trauma-informed is not about stigmatizing trauma and or sensationalizing it. It's an acknowledgement of the reality, right? So this universal assumption of trauma is this. We work in a field where folks, once again, they're coming to all kinds of things, all kinds of challenges that they face, and a ton of strengths. So for us is to understand and look at reactions and responses from that lens of, oh, it might have taken a lot to come here, as opposed to jumping into this lane of compliance. They're not ready. They don't want the service. They're resistant. All of this language that I was fortunate enough to hear and challenge in my early part of my career, right? I used to get in a lot of trouble at previous employers because I used to push back on compliance. I'm like, what does that even mean? And I was like, compliance meaning, that they're not satisfying us. They're not satisfying me, as opposed to what is getting in the way of folks not not doing what we've maybe contracted with them informally or formally or whatever, right? Really kind of seeking understanding. So universal assumption of trauma is really like understanding that folks coming through our doors with all kinds of stuff going on, and it's our responsibility to ask more questions as to what what those behaviors are about that we're seeing. So let me see what's coming up in the chat. Oh, someone said, "Where's the applause for that?" Yeah, thank you, Anna. Yeah, I got in trouble for that one though when I pushed back. So sometimes you got to push back for what's right, uh, what you feel is right. But hey, it happens. So, so some of the core principles of trauma-informed care, I'm sure many of you have seen these. Um, Safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, mutual self-help, collaboration, empowerment, and being mindful of cultural, historical, and gender issues. A couple things I really want to highlight, I want to tap into. Can we guarantee safety? Can we create a safe space for our clients? Put in there. No, no, ooh, safe enough, no, no, yes, no, to some degree, no, absolutely, yes, if we really tried. All right, okay, all right. Honestly, I would say no. We cannot guarantee full safety. We can never guarantee full safety because we don't know. We're not walking in their shoes. What we can do is work to create a safe enough space through trustworthiness and transparency, right? And safety is not just physical safety. It's safety of my story. Is my story going to be shared in a way that is inaccurate, right? And part of this document, how we tell the story, how we write the story, is so important, especially around trustworthy transparency. Staff I've worked with over the years, I always tell them when we're doing our notes, regardless of whatever the system is and like the timelines of when you have to submit your reports or your progress notes or whatever it is that you have, I always say, whatever you write down, you should feel comfortable enough to have to be able to speak on it if your client got to read it. If you cannot have that conversation with your client about what you wrote, you're catching them off guard, and that's not being transparent with folks. You can also give up the really tough information in your documentation, but it should never catch someone off guard. Over the years, there were many times while we were working in the courts where I myself submitted reports to the court when I worked in the courts for a number of years that the client on the other side was like, "Why would you say that about Mr. Kirby? I didn't know you thought that way." And I was like, I was doing my job. And then I look back at that, I go, I was up against so much back and forth and contentiousness when I was like, I have to keep a secret about this because I'm fearful of the the uh the blowback. But it was worse for the client because now I submit this into evidence, or I submit this into the system, and other people now can have access to it. So I learned to like not, if I'm gonna write it down, you're gonna see what I'm writing, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and we are gonna talk through it, right? I remember I had a young person I was working with years ago. Everything's years ago, right? I still see folks currently, but years ago I was working with a young man who disclosed that he had an incident with his significant other in front of the child, and their child was hurt in their fight. So I told him, because he told me this, I had to call in the case to Child Protective Services. He was upset, screaming and hollering at me, saying all these horrible things. I had to be able to step back and ratchet detach. And I said, listen, we can do this call together. You know I have to do it, but we can do this together. So you hear everything I'm saying, so nothing is caught off guard. So at least with our work, I'm being transparent with you. I can't control what happens beyond it, but I can walk with you. And I remember I sat down there with him, and it was awkward as ever for me. This is the first time I've ever done something like this. He's sitting next to me. We're talking. I'm telling him the allegations over the phone. I'm sitting with him right now. And then I'm like, all right, they accepted the case. I told them they're going to be coming down later on. And we were able to work through that together. And he was able to say he was upset with me, but he also was like, I appreciate you being upfront with me, because he had his history of people, especially helpers, people coming to help, not being straightforward with him, and also being about like and or being fearful of his responses. So we acted in fear. You know, we want to take universal precautions around our own safety, but we shouldn't be fearful of other people that we're fortunate to get to sit here and work with. Um, and honestly, in that work, another part of that was another principle being collaborative and mutual in our work with this young person, my young person. He felt that I gave him a voice. I said this, and he cleared up different aspects of the story for me. And I was like, okay, that's what you told me. And that's actually, thanks for giving me more additional color to it. So let me see what's going on in the chat for a second before I move on to the next slide. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough when you're, thank you, Vanessa. It's tough to be a mandated reporter and hold that, right? Because it's like, I have to do it. And it's so easy for us to just do it and say, well, I had no choice to hide behind my job. We can hide behind our role to do the thing that we don't necessarily maybe want to do, but sometimes we have to do it, right? And when we do those tough things, we have to be able to sit with it and also document in a way that is straightforward and honest and based in what happened. And this is another part of this documentation stuff is really got to stick to what happened, what was shared with you, right? So perfect segue into our own biases. We bring bias into our work. We do. I bring my own bias. I can tell when I've worked long enough where I can tell where when I'm writing a note or something that I don't know if I really like the person, that really enjoy the person I'm working with right now. And I'll notice I'm using a bit more assertive language. And when I notice that, I have to like, okay, let me start this over, right? But being able to be honest with ourselves, right? Around what are um, areas of like our blind spots or areas that we don't see in how we are writing our shit, telling the story. I say documentation. I'm thinking honestly, we're telling the story. We're telling someone's story, or even the story of their life in our world, right? So the other thing is, what do we do with that bias when we have our own bias? Like I know I mentioned all of my identities, right? I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a husband, I'm all these things, right? As everyone is. I know that there's certain folks that come through doors that bring up things for me, right? I know that when there are older men who have caused harm to children, it brings me back to a place. And I have to remind myself while I'm in that session or when I'm telling that story after the session or the case management session, that person is a different person than the person that harmed 8-year-old Ken. So I have to be, that is the conversation that I have in my head all the time. And I'll share another story. I worked with this man. He was he would come to sessions religious. He would come to sessions on time and never hardly ever miss a session. And if he did miss a session, he would tell me he's gonna be missing. And every time I'm in session, let's say I have an hour session, I give him like 55 minutes, 52. I wouldn't let him process as much. And I noticed, I didn't realize, I was like, but he's doing what he's doing. I'm doing what I'm doing. If it wasn't for my own like supervision, which with the focus on, okay, let's get through the task, but also let's look at what you're bringing into the work, I wouldn't have seen this. So in the session, in my supervision, I'm talking about this particular client and talking about our plan of what we're going to be doing. And my clinical supervisor goes, Kenton, you got a personal thing with this person. I go, what are you talking about? And they're like, nah, I don't know what it is, but look at the way, the language you use when you're writing, and even your posture and how you're talking about the case, the situation. I'm like, I didn't see it, but she planted a seed in my head. And I remember going, I sat back, I thought about it for a little while, and I said, oh, had a light bulb moment. This person, this man, looked and walked and had the same body language as one of my childhood bullies. And I don't know, I did not realize it. And when I realized it, I started reflecting back on my notes and how the tone of those notes were a lot different than the other notes. But I was getting things done, so no one else was picking up on that unless I was able to process. And I realized, wow, I'm only giving him like 55 minutes. I'm not giving him his full hour. I'm not allowing him that space to process a little more. I'm jumping right into solutions with him because I don't want to be here, because he brought me back to 8-year-old Ken. So I had to really check myself. And this is why it's so important to check ourselves and stick to what they're telling us. Many times we sit here and we go, we have to get to the bottom of things. Get to the bottom of things sounds like we're trying to do an investigation, right? If that's not our job, that's not our job. We gotta listen to their story. And someone mentioned that they're an author. So you follow what they tell me. So exactly. And staying in that space. But the big point there was having that conversation, having that supervision relationship, and having that kind of integrated into your practice as a team to be able to help you all see the forest through the trees. As individuals, you're working with that person in front of you, and that's all you have. Sometimes folks around you can see things you don't see. And that's where your team and your supervisors are super valuable. Supervisors are super valuable in that regards. So, but another part of not just bias and documentation, like, seeing our own documentation of bias in our documentation, even the biased language we use in our documentation is super important to be mindful of. So like, I know for years we used to hear folks refer to folks that were formerly incarcerated as ex-offenders or ex-cons, or other language that was really kind of specific to the worst moment of someone's life, right? Like our formerly incarcerated person or a returning citizen is language that we should really be focusing on, right? Living with a disability over handicap, that was stuff that was documented. I used to capture folks' disabilities in my documentation. Immigrant over illegal alien, right? I feel like we read this stuff and I'm going, wow, 15, 20 years ago, I didn't think anything about this, but this is the evolution of our practice and evolution of our field. We have to constantly take a look into what we're doing. And if we get used to something, we gotta start taking a look at why we're used to it, right? Let's see, just try.
Question in the
Go ahead,
chat
Taylor.
asking how you changed engagement and services with that client you were just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, whoops, I started and kept going on. Thanks, Aylin. I realized I had to say in session, I had to say to myself, this person is not blank. This is not my bully, this is an individual, but it was going on in my head. I had to do things before session, during session, and after session in my head, like my own practices, to kind of remind me that he wasn't him. And I'll tell you, this young man, it was eerie how much he reminded me of my old bully when I was a kid. So I'm in this, and there you go. You see how the power dynamic that we bring into the work can play itself out, right? I'm thinking about 8-year-old Kenton, and I'm sitting here documenting all these notes about this young person who has nothing to do with what happened, what I'm dealing with in my documentation. And I had to be like, that's totally not fair to this young person. Totally not fair to this human being who's simply just here because they want to get some sort of help They want to get some help. They want to get some clarity in some things that they're managing. And then the challenge, the thing is there, if I wasn't able to get through it and get past it, that's where the conversation of, am I the right person? Because we're also, so much of this work is about relationship, right? So much of this is relational. And that's another part of it. Maybe I'm not the right person. So hopefully that answered your question, how I got through it. Let's see. Let me keep going on. Let's see. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about implicit bias. It's a shared understanding. I feel like we need to have a shared understanding of what we mean by implicit bias. So this is a definition from the Perception Institute, and I love this definition. Thoughts or feelings are implicit if we're unaware of them or mistaken about their nature. We have a bias when, rather than being neutral, we have a preference for or aversion to a person or group of people. Thus, we use the term implicit bias to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without our conscious knowledge. A fairly commonplace example of this is seen in studies that show that white people may frequently associate criminality with Black people without even realizing they're doing it. So it's so much of this, we don't even realize we're doing it. It's the remedy to this implicit bias is striving towards curiosity. And the definition is talking about being neutral. I always say it's hard to be neutral but we can be curious, right? Curious because curiosity in our work and even is more about taking someone by what they're saying. Neutrality means I'm going to challenge you. You're going to tell me this, but I also got to hold this other side, right? Taking someone by basically what they're saying, right? Why not trust folks and what they're saying? Because if we trust folks, let them prove us wrong. But if we walk into there saying, I'm going to take you at face value, what you're telling me. And then, sometimes we have to highlight things that may be inconsistent. But sitting in that centered space, that curious space. And so another part of this is sometimes how we show up is also an implicit bias. Sometimes you have folks that maybe we do more for. When we're doing we're making sure we are putting together that amazing advocacy letter for this survivor because we're so invested in them. And sometimes that's not also to the benefit of the person either, right? That is us helping, right? Serving is, once again, it goes right back to serving and capturing. You see how all these things are kind of tied in together. Serving and maintaining is another way of tackling our own implicit bias. Not eliminating, we're going to have it, but just kind of help putting it to the forefront for top of brain for us to be mindful of. Let me see if there's anything else in the chat. Why is my computer not showing me? Whoopsie, there we go. Let me go back actually. Get into that. I can't see where the chat. Here we go. Let's talk in the chat. Let me see. There's a question here. How do you serve individuals who are extremely combative, challenging what you have documented in your notes, and that is not what they said? Please advise and thank you. All right, Carolyn. One thing I actually do, I've done in the past, is I'll let them see what I'm going to write. I'll let them see what I'm writing, and it's because then if I let you see what I'm writing, there's no surprises. Similar to how I called in that case to child protection with the person right next to me. It's challenging. It's not easy to do. It's kind of goes against the grain of our instincts as practitioners, but that is I feel one way of doing it. The second part is they're combative. What is that behavior telling me? The combativeness may be telling me, expressing a need. Maybe that combativeness is not feeling like they're being heard, right? There's a number of reasons why someone may be combative. Or I even say giving certain energy, giving a bill or assertive energy. Hopefully that answered your question. So Let's get to the meat and potatoes of actually documenting. All right. So let me see the chat. Another thing in the chat. Yeah. So yeah, once again, our folks are coming to us. If you hold this universal assumption of trauma, the behaviors that we look at as combative may actually be looked at as, okay, they're trying to tell me something. It's not about me battling you, right? They're not battling me as the individual. Maybe there's a need that's not being met, and it's up for us to be curious. You seem really elevated right now. Talk to me about this. What about this doesn't make sense to you? You didn't say that? Okay. I remember you saying that. Well, you didn't? Well, what did you say? And if it wasn't what they said, initially you say, okay, you're telling me that you're saying this now, but initially this is what was said to me. I'll make a note of it that this was what you said, and we had a conversation and you mentioned that this is what you said instead. I'll make a note of that, but I'm going into the skid of the combativeness, right? And I tell you, that's why one of the biggest things is I'll let you read it. Let you read what I'm writing. It's for public, it's about you. You should be able to have access to it. You should be able to look at what I write about you, right? There shouldn't be, if we talk about trauma, being trauma informed, it's how are we transparent? That's one of the core principles of it. Kate, you mentioned a quick question. Would the recommendation be to review each clinical note with clients? Yep. Actually, yeah, I would say I don't write anything down unless I let the person see it. This is what I'm going to put in the record. Are you okay with it? If you think about it from a lens of they're bringing their expertise of their lived experience, they should be able to have access to it. I shouldn't be sharing. And if it's talking about fact, to the author, the person who's the author here, writing just what the folks say to me, they should be able to see it. They should be able to see it. They should have a right to see their work that you're writing about them. So we're gonna do an exercise here. All right, y'all ready for a fun exercise? All right. So let me see. Let me set my timer real quick. Hold on 1 second before I get there. I know I shared with y'all. I think y'all did get the slides beforehand, but I kept this one away because I'm like that. So I'm gonna give y'all 15 seconds to look at this picture. Just look at it, pay attention to what you see. And we're gonna stop. So you all looked at the picture. There was a nice party there. In the chat, how many balloons did you see in the party? Put in the chat. Okay. Some folks said 6, some folks said 5, 7. All right. Okay. Didn't count. Okay. None. 6 balloons. All right. Okay. Okay. So the correct answer there is there were 6 balloons. 6 balloons. We'll go back to the picture what I've done here. How many cookies did you see in the party? How many cookies were there? 2 plates. I said how many cookies? 10, 2 trays, 10. No idea. Unsure. You folks on it was a party. No idea. All right. Okay. Here's the last one. How many bottles of apple juice did you see at the table? 2 bottles of apple juice, 4 bottles, none. All right. Correct answer. Y'all ready for it? There was no apple juice on the table. There was orange soda. So let's go back here. Go back to the picture. All right. I share this because it's important for us to be curious of just what's around us, especially in our role as we are curious observers in the world of the folks that we get to work with. When they're telling their stories, when they're telling us what they need, their history, we are curious observers. So when you have that space of just being in that curious space of observing, it's a little more likely for you to be able to recognize that there's 6 balloons back there. Easy for you to recognize that there's orange soda and not apple juice. And also, who has apple juice at a party anyway? It's probably most likely orange soda, right? But that is our job as observers, curious observers. I wouldn't even say curious, loving observers, curious, caring observers. So then, if you're not there, we may look at this picture or the landscape of the person's situation or thing that they're hanging out with. Yes, there's no diversity in that picture at all. I know. Kids shouldn't drink soda, but but for the sake of what I'm arguing here is many times we hear people tell their story and they're talking to us about their history, what brought them there. And we jump into help mode. We jump into fix it mode. And that sometimes can lead to us losing sight of the big picture, losing sight of what they're telling us, what they're giving us, right? So I would say in the beginning phases of working relationship with a participant, yeah, get that story. Stay observant and curious. So then when you see the picture and you're away from that situation and you're writing your notes, you're able to pick up on the fact that there are balloons how many balloons are back there, and how many bottles of soap, bottles of apple juice or orange soda are there. And yes, my health conscious people, I get it. I don't drink a lot of soda either. You say Kendall was going through sugar shock. Yeah, the child is going through sugar shock apparently. I think I should switch the picture for the next time I do this. So, but let me see. Any questions that are coming up right now? In the chat specific to being able to be a curious observer? What's in the soda is a question. Oh Lord have mercy. All right, people. All right. So I hope y'all getting that whole notion of being curious. All right, about just and that gives us more space to be able to see the big picture. And let's see who came in the chat. Yeah, if you're observing, you don't formulate opinion. Maybe you don't need an opinion at that point. And what's the opinion at that? Is it opinion or an assessment? And sometimes we mix up opinion and assessment, especially if you think, no worries, all Lisa Marie. No worries at all about that. But so many times we think about, in many of our spaces, we're talking about, sometimes we give expert opinion, and sometimes people think assessment is expert opinion, but it also kind of the process may be similar, right? So that's why it can be a little challenging. So no worries about that. So let's see. Here's my favorite line over the course of my career that I've found, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this. If you don't write it down, it never happened. If you don't write, my first job, that was all I heard. That is my mantra. If you don't write it down, it never happened. And what does that mean? It's actually, it was my same thing. I learned it on the first day of my job. If you don't write down, it's never happened. And what do you think that leads to? It perhaps leads to people writing novels about people's stories. Are there ways that this mantra may not be helpful? How can this not be helpful? Not if you're in a legal setting. Okay. All right. Ida, tell me more about that. Say more. Love to be great if we had voices, but it's all good now. People are pretty lively in the chat. So can't tell someone else's story. So the other part of this is we have different personalities. We have personalities in our writing. I write differently than the next person, different than Heather, different than Rachel or Paula, uh, in our writing styles. We're going to be different. Um, the other part about it, the info could be subpoenaed, to Toya's point. Yeah, and sometimes we get very caught up in this notion of we have to get everything on paper and then everyone else will filter through what's relevant or not. So then when you do that, you leave it in the hands of others to determine what's important information to pull from it. I remember many years ago, I was in court and I remember reading a report. I didn't write this report. I remember reading a report and it had all this information that I felt was more gossip about the particular client. And it talked about the person's alleged ties to a street organization, right? And for the sake of the case, that child was removed from their parents. Why are you choosing to, if the report's about the parents, why are we choosing to include this child's alleged affiliations into a report? That's now going to go on the record and now can follow this kid. And you can't confirm it or deny it. You can't confirm it either. So now we put that in the way, and we wrote it down, but now this could potentially follow this young person. It could be subpoenaed. It could be other folks, other service providers can, let's say if my agency closed and another agent took over and they're looking at the case files and they pull it up and they see that line in there. And maybe that wasn't the kid's, maybe it wasn't the child's actual, maybe it wasn't actually true. And now this follows a kid, you know? So just something to consider. I'm not saying throw away this term. I'm not saying at all. What I am saying is scrutinize it. It's something that and I think we should always be scrutinizing our work and thus forth. All right. So let me see if things coming up in the chat. Sharing, yeah. And also that's the other part about it. Like, think about when we're working with our folks, our participants are people, right? They are, every time they have to tell their story or talk about the worst moment in their lives and we're writing it down, that's how we live it. It's like, I feel like it's a stripping of their autonomy. And so being mindful of what does that do for what kind of impact can that have on a person when we're constantly stripping their autonomy and we're doing it through our notes, right? So just want to throw this out here. No, we don't need to come to a conclusion on this. Just think about that. You don't write down, it never happened. And what does it, when you first got here into the field, what it meant then, and maybe what it means to you now. And I encourage y'all to interrogate that a bit. So, like I said earlier, you just take notes, keep a record of our work. You keep many experience stories. It's a way to stay organized, as I mentioned earlier. And this is a placeholder for us to refer back to from one session to the next. How many of y'all go back? How many of y'all before a case management session, therapeutic session with a client or participant, do you look back at your previous note before a session? And you can be honest. No one's recording this. Actually, they are, but no one's gonna snitch on you. So good. So it seems like there's definitely good practice here that's embedded. It is absolutely vital to make sure you're referring back to your note. And I would even say maybe even the last part. What I give you, I'm gonna share something, a way of taking notes that can make it a little easier to do it. So it is a very important thing to check back before you start your session, right? Here is, let's see. Here's some challenges with taking notes. How many of y'all, how much time y'all spend on note taking, right? So you go to some settings, they say you do 45-minute session, and you spend 15 minutes doing your note, right? But we all know that that's not seamless because maybe you have back to back to back to backs, right? Um, some folks may take notes while they're in session or in a case manager session. I don't usually like to unless it's like concrete specific things, like if there's like a program that someone's interested in going to. I'll be like, okay, what's the name of the program? And I'll write that down. But I'm not writing anything about process or story when I'm in session. Um, what information do we include and not include, right? Depending on your setting. There's certain things you include, some you don't include that are relevant. Once again, it's about relevant information. It's not keeping information from folks, but it's about what's relevant to the scope of the work we're doing here. All right. And I tell you, I've been on teams where I had a colleague who would write 3 lines for a session, and another colleague who would write a novel. Right. I was definitely not the novel person. I'm definitely not the person that writes the three lines, but I write in that little sweet spot, I think. Someone mentioned writing helps you concentrate on the speaker and erase everything else from around you. Yeah. So, in those moments, Barbara, I actually would even, if that was the case, I would even go, I hope you don't mind while we're doing this. I'm going to take some notes while we're talking. So I can like make sure I'm paying attention. Because sometimes I've seen folks feel like they're, it is hard not to write a novel, right? But the thing is, you got to determine between what's the juicy, gossipy stuff versus what is relevant to the work that our participant, our client, or survivor needs, right? And we all have different writing styles. I mentioned some of us write novels. I definitely am not the novel person. So let me see. This chat is active. Yeah. Right. So you're author too, Barbara. Okay, you got a lot of authors in here, man. This is great. So how can our documentation cause harm? I tell you, it can be misinterpreted. I gave you that story about a young person's a family court report mentioning a young person's alleged gang affiliation, and that had the purpose of the case had nothing to do with this young person in that sense, and that followed him, right? We know that mental health diagnoses and misdiagnoses, that just happens. But then if we're also writing it in a way that like we know who other folks are gonna have access to our documentation, they're gonna have access to it and different end goals based on their respective jobs. How do you want to be mindful of that, right? When I'm writing, what I'm trying to get out here can be misinterpreted. So it's I remember even going into homes when I worked for the city and having a family composition and like a roster of what the family was allegedly like. And I put this family through the ringer because I was like, there was another child listed on the family demographic, family composition that I received. And they were all looking at me like I had 10 heads, like they didn't know what I was talking about. But then when I started peeling back and I started doing my due diligence, after like 3 weeks of badgering these folks about produce this child for me, I need to see this child. Come to find out it was an error on our end. And we put this family through so much harm just because of a glitch and error on our side. So it's important to understand the gravity of what we're writing and how it can start a chain reaction, right? Literally, that like it was this family. I was like, if y'all don't do this, if y'all don't produce this child, I'm gonna have to go to court and then get an order for you to produce this child. And we were this close to doing it, and we realized it was a glitch on our end. And honestly, what the most trauma-informed thing, we did the least trauma-informed thing after that. We said, okay, it was an error, and we kept moving. We kept the conversation going. We said it was an error on our end, and we just kept on going, kept the case open, kept working with the family. So not a surprise that they were not big fans of our work together at that moment. So Yeah. So yeah, so really be mindful of the harm our documentation can cause if we're not mindful of it. So I really enjoy this notion of I like this DAP notes. It's pretty straightforward, regardless of whatever systems that you're using. It's like a framing in your head and how you structure your note taking. There's so many different. There's SOAP notes. I forgot SOAP stands for something, but DAP for me is pretty straightforward. It's data, assessment, and plan. And those 3 sections, they can be brief, right? But I always, it's funny. So I do a couple of jobs, and one of my jobs I teach at Brooklyn College, and I always tell my students, I'm not going to give you long papers, but I would rather less is more. I'd rather have you write something concise and to the point than something long with a lot of fluff to get to the point, because I want to get these students ready to be able to capture a story without adding the unnecessary stuff that can end up being harmful to the folks. So let's talk about this data section. So data is what you heard and observed during the session, the case management session. Most of the information is reported from the client. So this is what you're hearing and observing. And that is not just what you're hearing, but also how the client came in. They came in with their voice was elevated. They presented wearing whatever they were wearing, right? Their clothes were wet. And then what they said, what was going on, should be as close to objective as possible. But you can add some subjectivity to the section. So if you notice that if you come in and the client appears agitated or angry, or if you give a feeling to it, you want to give some sort of disclaimer as why. As evidence, and I always say this, is really helpful, as evidenced by, and then whatever you saw. Client appears agitated as evidenced by them walking into my office and giving me the finger, right? As evidenced by, they told me, Mr. Kirby, I'm really pissed off. As client appeared happy as evidenced by, they were smiling. Client appeared happy as evidenced by, they walked in and gave me a high five, right? So you can add the subjectivity as long as you add as evidenced by. This is where it's about this brings right back to being objective. The assessment, section is for your interpretation of what was shared during the session. So the interpretation of what was heard. What progress, if any, is the client making towards whatever goals that have been laid out, contracted out, at least in the early stages of the working relationship. And then also provide some insight into their self-report from that data section. So you can give some insight while they were talking about this whatever topic. While they were talking about the possibility of having to testify, they appeared nervous because when they were talking, they were shaking, they were twiddling their thumbs, they were diverting eye contact. So in our work, we are not just looking at what they're saying, but also their body language. And because that also informs our work with the client, right? So let's see what's going on in the chat. Quotes as much as possible. Yep. Quotes can be helpful. Yep. It's really helpful. I mean, let's see. And then the plan. I love the plan. I love the plan at the end. So, because plan also gets you ready for the next session. So plan is, you may give an assignment or something to do between sessions to the participant, or you may mutually say, okay, between now and the next time we meet, I'm gonna get a couple of possible job readiness programs for you, right? Together, I'm gonna get a list of them for you. I may text them to you, and then you maybe try to make a phone call to one or two of them before we meet next week. And then, this part is not like that. If you're in like a traditional clinical setting, this is not the treatment plan, or this is not necessarily the treatment plan. This may not even be necessarily specific to whatever the mandate may be if you're in a more court-based setting. But it's the task in between the sessions, or if you run groups or within or among the groups, right? You really quickly want to ask the question, what will they do next? What will I do next as a practitioner? Great thing about the plan, that plan section, you can start the session, the following session, with a check-in on the plan. So if you have the plan in your note as the last like two lines of your note to reflect back before a session, maybe read those last 2 lines, and maybe that jogs your memory about everything else that came up in the session, the previous session. So then that's a useful tip that can kind of get you ready for your next session. And yeah, especially if you have back-to-back or like you have like 5 minutes in between, maybe you do that. Or like I tell my people that I work with, if you gotta use a bathroom and do take care of yourself, go do that in between session. And go over there. So the homework is great. People love homework or a task to do between session. It also keeps the connection to the session going after the session, right? Or in a kind of an organic way. So now I'm gonna ask a question. Adapt note format can only be used by a mental health professional. Is that true or false? This format I'm mentioning, can it be true or false? Is only for mental health professionals. False, B, false. Wow, y'all are good at this. Y'all are absolutely right. The answer is false. All right, let's see what we got here. Let's keep going, keep this party going, y'all. So let's talk about specifics of what really goes in a note, right? So in a case management note, right, we want to focus more on the presenting issue that brought a client participant to our attention. The service is so like we want to think about the concrete things. The service referred to, the goals related to the services, and status of services and the goal, right? But also any obstacles that are are impacting attaining those measurables that we've kind of contracted out with one another between myself and the participant. So this is more specific information like task stuff, but also with task things, we also want to give space for understanding what's going on, what's getting in the way. If someone was supposed to go to an intake for a substance use program, and they missed 2 or 3 sessions, maybe this is where the conversation is, what's getting in the way? Okay, you missed the past couple of sessions. Oh, you didn't have car fare, or like, I'm very New York specific, right? New York City specific here. Or you don't have a Metro card to get to the appointment. Oh, I wish you would have told me. I can get you Metro cards. Oh, you having some other issues that are going on? Okay, maybe is it easy for you to just like, maybe we can have you come here to the office and we can do the intake over the phone here. Maybe you can negotiate, okay, our check-in time, come in and we know we're going to spend our time getting on the phone, and maybe we can do these intakes over the phone. All right. So more kind of, I would even say that's like supportive case management kind of framing and how we in that way, right? So that's that. And then let me continue. So you add that in the note. But in the clinical note, so you want to kind of focus on their social emotional status. Similar to how I mentioned in the DAP note, how someone presents to you, right? When at the time of session. I always say at the time of session, client presented as blank. And then once again, what do I say? As evidenced by. And then, you want to includes their functioning, like the analysis of how they're functioning based on the information we're getting from them. And also kind of any sort of emergencies that come up that are, suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, threats to themselves or others, some places like duty to warn, right? If they're threatening to harm someone else, that's where we kind of capture that. And also with these notes, it's also important to be able to check back and refer to a supervisor or another person, because once again, in any sort of emergency situation, you never handle it on your own. You're not an island in this work, right? Whether you're a case manager, intake person, advocate, social worker, whatever, you are part of a team, and definitely take advantage of the team. And this is these are some things that should go into a note. But think about the DAP framing as a way of using that into your whatever respective systems you have to enter your notes in. But once again, I mentioned things to consider, right? Descriptions of the presentation at the time of session, right? I think that's really important because then you can capture an arc. Okay, if you're having a session, a case management session, every time they're having a individual session, a therapeutic session, and they come in a bit agitated, and it's getting in the way of how some of the case manager work, then maybe there's a conversation about, hey, let's switch time to having them come in for case management, or switch like maybe to do case management first and then they meet with your clinician second, or vice versa, right? So this gives you space to assess how best to work with the client and bring them to the best version of themselves, especially if we leave with this universal assumption of trauma, right? A brief summary of the previous session should be 1 or 2 lines. We talked about previous session, we discussed they wanted to get into this program, and this week we're going to talk about that. And then talk about what happened in the current session, interventions used by the staff during the session. I observed the participant was really upset and seemed really sad. I offered some encouraging words, which seemed to give a bit of comfort to the participant, as evidenced by and whatever that headline is. And then takeaway, the homework, right? Let's see. And that's the other thing, offering resources if needed, right? The takeaway could also be a tangible resource that we give folks. Goal is not to write too much, too little. Your general note that you write, it should be able to be viewed by others, and got to include essential information to get to the point. You want to get to the point. You don't want to just get the stuff that's gossipy or juicy, because that's actually not in the service and a benefit of our program participants. And on that note, any questions, comments, concerns in the chat? I know we have about 5 minutes, so I want to leave a little space for any comments or anything. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll do that, yep. And we'll go from there, all right? Okay. Thank y'all for the positive words. All right.
While we wait for any questions to come in, I just want to say thank you so much, Kenton. This was really phenomenal. I'm going to briefly screen share so we can announce our upcoming webinars, Enhancing Your Services, Planning for Accessibility. This will be presented by Activating Change, and that is on May 24th. And then in June, we have a webinar that we will be facilitating in-house at CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance on managing yourself and up with the trauma-informed DEI lens. So you'll be able to register directly from the slides if you download those slides, and also we'll include the information in the follow-up email. But thank you again, Kenton, and folks, feel free to request TTA if you need it, and we look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
There is an applause emoji. I found it.
There is.
Yes. See.
Thanks, Kenton. That was awesome.
No problem. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. All right.
We'll have to get him to come back.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely come back. Great seeing a lot of my old friends, a lot of my friends in the Zoom. So hey, everyone. Oh, Justin put a question in. You mentioned power dynamics. How can documentation be used to address that or level the playing field? So Justin, I would say some simple things of, one, I don't document without, I'm not going to write something that I'm going to catch you off guard. You're going to see what I'm writing. You're at least going to have an idea of what I'm writing about. So the goal is never to never be caught off guard which goes back to one of the principles, the core values of being trauma informed. It's transparency with folks. So that's one of the ways to attack the power dynamic that we have no choice but to be a part of, because we are in this work. Hopefully that was helpful, Justin. Excellent. I don't like to record sessions because I don't know who's going to have access to it. Benny. It's how shall I say this? I'm my busiest in session, Benny, in my head. I'm trying to capture as much information, much relevant information as possible. And someone's eating a cookie. I wish I had a cookie.
And just a voiceover, because I think that Pat might be moving too quickly. Yes, this session is being recorded. It will be posted within the next few days. When we send a reminder for the evaluation, which we did ask you to complete, we will share it, but you can find it on the UBS YouTube page. Would you mind typing that into the chat just so people have?
You didn't hear Rachel's audio was a little choppy too, but we're putting the recorded session on our OVS YouTube page. We'll put a link for that for everyone as well. Give us a day or so it takes to get it published up there.
So I'm not seeing any more questions coming through. So thank you all again. Yes, we will put the evaluation survey back in the chat, and also it should when you exit the Zoom, it should directly take you to the evaluation survey. And it'll also be included in the follow-up email if you miss it in either of those places. And again, we really appreciate feedback on those surveys. We really do look at it and take everything into consideration as we're planning future webinars and developing training opportunities for individual organizations, et cetera. So please let us know what we can do. I also saw a question, does this webinar count as CEUs? Unfortunately, we are not able to offer CEUs at this time, but we're looking into it. So maybe in the future, but no promises until everything is submitted and ready to go. But we do recognize that that is something that a lot of folks would benefit from. All right, well, we will go ahead and end the webinar then. Thank you all again so much, and we'll see you at the next one, hopefully. Bye, everyone. Take care.